Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, a terrifically talented chef I've known for several years who's made quite a name for herself in the world of sushi, where she shattered the stereotype of the sushi chef in that she's female, black, and Jewish. Here's Marisa Baggett. Hey Marisa, it is great to see you again. How are you?
I am fantastic, David. Good to see you.
You are clearly not the stereotypical sushi chef. For one thing, you're not Japanese.
Correct.
Where were you born?
I was born in a little bitty town in Mississippi.
Which one?
Starkville, Mississippi.
And was food an important part of your life in Mississippi?
Yeah, I mean, food was kind of central to everything we did as a family. All of the women in my family were amazing, phenomenal cooks. Both of my grandmothers were kind of renowned in their even smaller towns than Starkville for, you know, their specialties. And food was just really central to every gathering that we had family-wise.
What'd you eat as a kid?
We didn't eat sushi, I can tell you that. As a kid, you know, we ate the typical, what you would think of as Southern food. The meat and three was huge part of everything. We ate a lot of, what was in season at the time. People had relationships with, maybe if my grandmother wasn't growing her own greens, she knew somebody who was, and she could trade maybe some of her beans or something. And so we ate a lot of typical Southern style vegetables, soul food, that sort of thing.
But I thought we invented local and seasonal recently. I mean, how could you be eating like that back then? How'd you end up cooking professionally?
I had a little job after school in high school, washing dishes, of all things, at a home style, very small Cantonese restaurant. And I fell in love with it. I thought, wow. I mean, even though I was washing dishes and occasionally Mr. Kong would let me help him chop some veggies, I thought, you mean this is something people can do for a career? I mean, I certainly didn't know of any chefs, and we didn't really have, the type of restaurants that you would think of as like, oh, this is a chef-run establishment and that's a legitimate career. No, that was something that people on TV did, not something that people in Starkville, Mississippi did. But I just thought, wow, how cool would it be to do something like this for a living?
So how'd you start doing it for a living?
As I moved on to college, I think one of my first jobs was as a hostess at Applebee's. And I complained so much that they finally let me go back in the kitchen. I was like, I don't want to be up front. I want to be in the kitchen. And they're like, no, you belong in front. I was like, no, I belong in the kitchen. From that job to just other little random jobs, I ended up meeting a wonderful, wonderful chef who was running a bed and breakfast. And she kind of like pulled me in and did some mentoring. And once my parents figured out that I was not going to give up this crazy dream of cooking for a living, they helped me open my first little restaurant in Starkville.
So what kind of place was it?
It was a cute little, I would say, bistro, kind of a Southern style. It was really kind of my experimental playground because I was doing a lot of really fun stuff. Of course, we had the staples, the chicken salad that everybody loves, and sandwiches and nice little pasta dishes. That's kind of where I got introduced to the thing that I really wanted to do, which was make cakes.
You were deep into baking.
I was deep into baking. Yeah.
How'd you get from that to sushi?
I'm going to say that being young and thinking that you're invincible is how I got into sushi.
Tell me this story.
At my place, my restaurant, there were a lot of people who would come to me for catering because I was willing to kind of go off the beaten path. There was no like established menu. So people would say, we're having a party. This is what I'd like to serve. And so one of my best clients came in one day and said, hey, I'd like to rent the place out and have an office party. And I'm like, of course. What's the menu? And he says, let's do sushi. And I'm like, let's do it. Great. He leaves and I freaked out because I was like, what did I just promise?
Had you ever had sushi?
I'd never had sushi. I think the first time, maybe the only thing, my only reference for sushi was the short little clip from The Breakfast Club when Molly Ringwald eats sushi.
Oh, yeah.
No sushi bars in town. Nearest one several hours away. No clue what I was going to do.
So what'd you do?
At the time, I went to the library hoping that there were going to be all of these sources for sushi. There were not, just a bunch of Japanese cuisine general cookbooks. And so I decided that I was just going to try to figure it out. I found like a chapter on how to make sushi rice, decided that if I don't use raw fish and not kill anybody and just get through this experience, that I'll be more careful about what I promise people that I can do for them.
So what'd you make and how'd it go?
I focused on doing things that felt very kind of Southern, because I thought, okay, well, I don't know anything about sushi. I'm not using raw fish. So I'm going to use some stuff that people are familiar with, and I'm going to kind of make it sushi-like, and it's going to be great. So I used a lot of pickled okra because I was running across a lot of things in Japanese cookbooks that talked about using pickled things. So I was like, okay, well, we got pickled okra. That's great. We'll do that. I used crawfish. Cooked crawfish. We did, of course, use some shrimp. I did a lot of things with vegetables and just kind of making them little Southern twists, like using green beans and maybe putting a little cream cheese in this. Put a lot of effort into creating this whole vibe, put the night together. The client loved it. Apparently, the word got out in this really small town because we had people knocking on the back door asking if they could buy the leftover sushi, which now in retrospect sounds really funny. But I was just like, what is it with this sushi thing that people are just going nuts about? Like, I really didn't think I was ever going to do it again, ever.
But you did.
But I did.
In Starkville? I mean, did you?
In Starkville. Because what happened is people kept hearing about this experience, and I don't know, they kept calling the restaurant saying, oh, I hear you have sushi night. I was like, no, that was just like a one-time thing. And they're like, no, I hear you have sushi night. So hearing a business opportunity, I'm like, okay. We're going to have a sushi night. We'll do it like once a quarter, which turned out to not be enough, that people were just like, no, you got to do this like once a week. I was like, how about once a month? And they're like, no, how about like once a week? And so they kind of twisted my arm and we started making sushi, like having a sushi night once a week. And it was great.
And you obviously fell in love with it.
I did. Or I fell in love with what I thought sushi was. Because at this time, I mean, I still hadn't seen anybody else's sushi in person, still hadn't eaten anybody else's sushi, not gone to a sushi bar. So what I was serving to me was what sushi was. And I was perfectly content with that until I wasn't.
And we'll be right back. And then you upped and left and went to California to learn sushi?
I did, because something happened that changed everything.
Which was?
I was so content to just do this little creative sushi. When you're a small restaurant owner, if someone calls and says they want to like rent out the restaurant for the night, it's a big deal. So I had someone call from a fancier town in Mississippi saying that they wanted to bring in some of their business colleagues and they wanted to make sure that the night they were coming, we were going to have sushi. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so great. It's so amazing. And they're like, we hear amazing things. And so on the night of, this guy pulls up and he's got 11 Japanese businessmen straight from Japan with him.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
What'd you think?
I freaked out. I grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels and I politely went and locked myself in the bathroom.
Good response. You still had to make him a meal, though.
You know, when I went to the bathroom, I really didn't know what was going to happen. I really just kind of abandoned the thought of going back out there and doing this because at that point, it made it so clear that I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, what could I possibly do? They're going to like laugh at me. They're going to get up and leave.
But they didn't, did they?
But they didn't. And once once my staff coerced me out of the bathroom
And took away the bottle of Jack Daniels.
and took away the bottle of Jack Daniels, I promised myself, I said, okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get through this. And then you're never, I don't care what anybody ever says, you're never making sushi again. So I made the sushi for them and they were very respectful. They weren't expecting an authentic experience. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. And then they ordered more. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. I think the reason I freaked out is because I didn't know what I was doing. And I never want to stand in front of someone and not know what I'm doing sushi-wise ever again. And I decided in that moment that I was going to become a sushi chef. Didn't know if it was possible, but I was going to figure it out.
So what'd you do?
So I did a little research and found this school in California, talked to them and decided that, yeah, this is exactly what I'm looking for and exactly what I need to do.
This was the California Sushi Academy.
This is the California Sushi Academy in Los Angeles. I was so excited. They were excited about the potential of me coming. And I told all of my family and friends, and they were like, no, you're crazy. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Like, you can't become a sushi chef.
But you went.
But I did. I did go. I closed down the restaurant and I kind of like ran away. It just kind of felt like now or never. I really felt like this was something I had to do. So I had about, I don't know, after I bought my one-way Greyhound ticket to LA, I had about $300 left. And I jumped on the bus and I went.
And when you showed up at the California Sushi Academy?
It was major culture shock for me, coming from a very small town in Mississippi, just being in, LA culture in general, but then also this subculture of Japanese cuisine and just being immersed in this very specific kind of cuisine and sushi school.
Was it tough?
It was very tough. In the very beginning, it was made very clear to us that most of the classes were going to be taught in Japanese and that we were going to have to try to figure it out. I mean, there of course was some English, but the idea I think was to kind of immerse us into some of the culinary Japanese so that we could potentially be behind a sushi bar or work with other Japanese sushi chefs. So the sensei was very, very strict. The things that we were expected to do were just things that I never thought about. Like, we were graded on how long our fingernails were. We were graded on how clean our uniforms were, because you go in and you're dressed in all white. And at the end of the day, you better not have a single speck of anything on you. And your station must be absolutely pristinely clean, in addition to being able to do all of the things that you have to do as a sushi chef.
Which are?
You have to be able to make incredibly beautiful sushi rolls and plate them properly. You have to be able to cut fish, and that's butchering fish and cutting the nice little pieces for sashimi and nigiri. And you have to interact with a customer also while doing this in a clean, pristine space without cutting yourself.
How many women were in the class?
So the interesting thing about our class is that the year that I was there were several women who actually came over from Japan to learn at this school, because we're still talking about a time where it was absolutely unheard of for women to be behind a sushi counter. And so I would say that I believe there were 13 women. So just about the halfway point of the class were women, many of them from Japan. Their idea was to go back to Japan and open like recreational cooking schools for tourists, because they had no intention of being behind a sushi bar. They just knew it wasn't possible. The thing about me, though, is I didn't know that wasn't a thing. Because I didn't know enough about sushi culture and what sushi was. I just came from this little spot in Mississippi where I was doing the thing and I didn't know any better.
You ended up, what, number 2 in your class?
I think I was number 3.
Oh, 3. Pardon me. So clearly you did very well.
I did.
And came out of school as a total anomaly, a non-Japanese, African-American sushi chef. How'd you get a job?
I actually had a job before I graduated.
Whoa.
So Interesting story. There was a woman in Memphis, Tennessee, who was looking to open a sushi bar, and she was going to be opening one of the first non-Japanese run sushi bars, and plenty of sushi chefs in Memphis. And she thought, okay, I'll open the sushi bar and I'll have people that'll want to come and work. And no one wanted to work for her because they thought, well, why would I work for someone who's not Japanese? And so a friend of mine called me while I was in school and said, hey, you ought to call this lady. And so we talked, and she talked to my instructors. And I ended up walking out of school in a really great situation where I was going to be the head sushi chef.
Were you up to it?
I was up to it. I was so ready. I mean, we're talking about somebody who was ready to make sushi before they even knew what it was. So, handing me a head sushi position after some training, that was right up my alley.
How'd it go?
It went fantastic. For me, it was a good, the restaurant was small, so it was a chance to really kind of bring some of the more simple traditional things that I had learned in school to the table and blend them with some more funky, creative, just kind of sushi lounge kind of things. The kind of things that you really didn't start seeing until maybe about 10 years ago. We were a little bit ahead of our time.
What kind of things?
Like, we were kind of doing some of the, like, you go to these sushi lounges and they have like these, these one singular roll that has like all of the seafood and the, intricate sauces and the pops of caviar with the microgreens and that sort of thing. And there just weren't a whole lot of places like that, especially not in the South. I mean, you could see that at maybe like a Nobu or something like that, but we were kind of doing things like that well before they were pretty mainstream.
Diverging from, in many cases, the sushi you would find in Japan.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be right back. Is American sushi valid as it diverges from what's in Japan?
I think so. There's a couple of things that people have to understand about traditional sushi versus American sushi. Traditional sushi is more than just what the ingredients are. It's how it's prepared, and it's very seasonal and that sort of thing. So in my opinion, even if you get a fish from Japan, it's out of season, and you make sushi with it, to me, that's not traditional. It just goes against everything that sushi is about. And I think that taking sushi and adding a regional twist, a national twist, like we tend to do with everything in America, and make it our own, I think it's very valid as long as it's crafted well.
What's the soul of sushi?
The soul?
The ethos. I mean, you talk about it's more than just the food.
It is. It's about honoring the craft and honoring the ingredients. One of the things that people people always hear, oh yeah, sushi is all about the rice, but I don't think that people really understand how deep that really flows through every ingredient with sushi. Like, yes.
Okay, let me stop you for 1 second, because what you just said is key, and some people don't realize it. Sushi's it doesn't have to be fish, right?
No, it doesn't. In fact, it can only be called sushi if it's made with the vinegar dressed rice. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't have vinegar dressed rice, it's not sushi.
Okay. And the way you look at it, you want to use what's local, you want to use what's in season. Mm-hmm. You got pretty Southern with that, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Part of it was being resourceful, because we couldn't always source some of the things that you would think of if you were looking through, like, say, a traditional sushi cookbook or Japanese cookbook. But then the other part of it was, I think you also have to know your customer. It's one thing as a chef to lead people down a path where you're showing them something new, but you also have to give them something familiar that they can grasp on to trust you to take them down the other path. That is very much my philosophy.
Well, the California roll kind of opened the door to sushi in America as a broadly accepted item, didn't it?
It did, but I think most people are surprised to find that the California roll is not created for Americans.
Please explain.
I understand that when sushi chefs were making sushi for Japanese businessmen that would come, back and forth from Japan, they were looking for a certain texture of tuna that they couldn't readily access here. And so there was this idea of, okay, well, if we can't get that, then let's mimic it with what we have locally. See, there comes the, okay, it's local. We're not going to force this fish to come from Japan if it's too absorbent in cost or we can't get it. We're just going to do something else. So this idea of mixing crab, which has kind of a certain texture and flavor, with avocado was said to kind of mimic this particular part of the fish that they couldn't get access to.
Then Americans discovered it and thought, I could eat this. It's not raw fish.
Yes, exactly. It was a good entry point.
What don't people understand about sushi? It's become ubiquitous. You can get it at the grocery store. You can get it at a drugstore. It's all over the place. What don't we know? What don't we get?
I think that people don't necessarily understand, and this is changing a little bit, but I'm still seeing it a lot. People don't understand that just like every other cuisine, sushi is made up. I can't tell you the number of people that are like, oh, I love a Godzilla roll. Can you make one? Well, probably, but I need to know what's in it. And then when I say something like that, they're very surprised because they don't understand why I don't know what that means. And so I think that people don't look at sushi as being something that can be creative, something that chefs, like if a chef opened a restaurant of hamburgers, they make up their own style of hamburgers. There's some basics, there's a bun, there's a burger. Like with sushi, there's some rice, there's some seaweed, but then how that's put together and crafted, the combinations of fish or vegetables and what goes in it is completely up to the chef. There is no exact, this is how you make this. There's only like 2 or 3 of those. And Americans don't usually want that anyway.
What are the southern ingredients? Give me an example of some of the sushi, southern sushi that you've made.
Sure. I rely heavily on pickled vegetables because to me, it feels like a nod to Japanese cuisine, but giving it a southern twist. So a pickled okra vegetable roll is kind of like my signature roll. Pickled okra, we love that in the South, and it goes very, very well with sushi. And it's also very pretty because you put the little okra in there and you cut it and it looks like a flower, which feels very Japanese to me.
Right.
Other things, in the past, I've used crawfish a lot. I've used catfish, but not in the way that people probably think. They probably think, oh, you fried some catfish and threw that in a roll. Well, actually, what we did instead is we took the catfish and we prepared it in a style similar to unagi or freshwater eel. So it was poached with the sweetened soy sauce and then torched. And so it has kind of a similar texture, but it's something that was more local and accessible here in the South.
Well, accessibility seems to be your mission in many respects. You've written a couple of cookbooks. Mm-hmm. You've run sushi making classes. I was lucky enough to observe one at your home. It was a delight. Isn't sushi accessible already?
Yes and no. Sushi is accessible in the fact that anybody can go and get it. It's at grocery stores now. Every restaurant seems to have like a little side sushi menu these days. So it's definitely out there for you to get. However, I think it's also not accessible because there's so much misinformation about what it is, who can make it, how it's made, that I'm not sure that we're actually always getting sushi.
You can make it at home?
You can make it at home. And personally, I feel like people should make it at home.
Okay, there's three kinds of sushi or 4? There's rolls. Walk me through that.
So there are a lot of different types of sushi. We tend to see and think of sushi mostly as rolls in America. There's several types of rolls. There's inside out rolls where the rice is on the outside and everything's on the inside. Then there are what I like to call fat mouth rolls, fudomaki, the thick ones. And then there's the thin rolls. There's hand rolls.
What's a hand roll? Bigger?
It's like a little cone, like a little ice cream cone with the seaweed on the outside and the rice and the fish on and everything else on the inside. And you just eat that without it being cut. There are little pieces of things on top of little beds of sushi rice called nigiri. And those tend to be the types of sushi that we see in America the most.
Mostly we see rolls, right?
But mostly we see rolls. I mean, we're definitely into sushi rolls.
Frequently done in ways that are unique. I mean, I found a sushi bar in a gas station in Oklahoma where they deep fry the roll.
Yes.
Because Oklahoma, they like chicken fried steak and such.
Yes.
Is that okay?
I think it is. I actually did a lot of that when I was in Memphis because, here in the South, we like fried things. I think the important thing is, though, rather than saying that if it's fried, it can't be authentic or it can't be sushi, is to just know that it's being done in a way that honors tradition.
If I want to make sushi at home, okay, first thing I buy your cookbook, right? What's the name of it?
Sushi Secrets or Vegetarian Sushi Secrets.
Okay. And then I go out and I buy a lot of expensive, specialized sushi equipment and ingredients, right?
You could, or you could just use what you have. That's one of the things that I love teaching my students at home is that you don't have to have a lot of expensive ingredients or equipment in order to make your own sushi. I was so overwhelmed when I was first learning or trying to teach myself this living in Mississippi. So anytime I think about the student experience, I think about, okay, when I was in Mississippi, what did I have access to?
So what did you replace with what?
Besides a rice cooker, which is the one piece of equipment that I really, really insist that people get, you don't have to have a big fancy cypress bowl. I never had one when I was first learning. I have one now because I enjoy it, but they're very expensive and you don't need it when you can just put the rice in a plastic bowl and mix it with the vinegar mixture. That's perfectly acceptable for a home cook.
But the rice has to be sushi rice, right?
But the rice has to be sushi rice.
So you have to buy it at an Asian store, or can you buy just a certain kind of rice at Walmart?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that because these days, because of the popularity of sushi, you can pretty much find the ingredients to make sushi everywhere. Every grocery store has the seaweed that you need, the nori. Every grocery store has short grain or medium grain California rice, which is what you need. It doesn't necessarily have to say sushi. If it says sushi on it, they're going to charge you more. But as long as it's the right type of rice, you can absolutely use it. And rice vinegar. That's really all you need.
What's a good beginner sushi dish?
I would always like to start people off with a futomaki roll, which is the big kind of fat rolls.
Easier to roll, huh?
So much easier to roll. You don't even have to have a sushi rolling mat.
Really?
I recommend getting one because it helps to shape it nicely. But if you don't have one, you can absolutely make a futomaki without it. I teach futomaki to children, and children take to it so easily. They can make it. And usually it's the first thing when I show people how to do that. They make it and they're like, oh, I just made sushi. And I just love seeing the pride on their face.
What do you recommend for like my first roll? What should be in it?
What should be in it? I recommend, these days, I'm all about the vegetables, but I'm not going to push that on everyone. So I would recommend using some sort of cooked seafood and 2 to 3 vegetable ingredients that pair well with that. I always like to say if it would go well together in a salad, it's probably going to be great in a sushi roll together.
Among many people, I think there's an almost fear of making an etiquette mistake in a sushi bar. How does one act there? What does one do?
It's a great question. There's really only a couple of things that I think are hard and fast rules at a sushi bar. And one has to deal with your chopsticks. When you're using chopsticks, well, actually a lot of rules around chopsticks, but the biggest no-no is you never want to stick your chopsticks into a bowl of rice to let them rest there. I always tell people, if you wouldn't do it with a fork, don't do it with chopsticks. So like if you were eating a bowl of rice, you wouldn't, when you're pausing with your fork, you wouldn't just stick the fork in your rice and just let it sit there while you're doing everything else. No, you would put it to the side. The same thing with chopsticks, because in Japanese culture, there are some funeral practices where the chopsticks are put into a bowl of rice to pass things to people. And so that's the biggest no-no.
How about ordering? Should you make your own choices or should you leave it up to the chef?
Either one that you could, if you know what you like, I think it's most appropriate for you to order for yourself, because a lot of times people can be very creative. And unless you really know the sushi chef, I wouldn't necessarily say that you should leave it up to them.
But there's a term for leaving it up to the chef, right?
There is. It's called omakase. And a lot of restaurants these days are popping up as sushi omakase restaurants where they have these tasting menus, which is a little bit different than, say, going to a traditional sushi bar and just saying, I leave it up to you.
And if you get something that you're revolted by, Can you just leave it?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about the first time I had sushi in a sushi bar. I wanted to taste sushi before I went to sushi school. And so my very first sushi bar experience, 2 days before I'm set to get on the bus to go to California. And I ordered this roll and I put the piece in my mouth and I'm sitting right at the sushi bar and it was awful.
What was it?
It was a soft shell crab. And not only was it bad, I know that now, it was bad, but it also wasn't cooked enough. And so it was this weird fishy juice. And I started, it was so bad, I started crying.
Oh, welcome to the world of sushi.
So you don't do what I did, which is fake a phone call, spit it in a napkin when they're not looking, and then take the rest to go so you can throw it away outside. I think that sometimes if you have something that you don't like, there might actually be something wrong with it.
Do you tip the sushi chef? Do you buy him a beer? What do you do?
They would appreciate that to kind of get around the murkiness of the tip sharing with the sushi chef versus the sushi waitress or the sushi serving staff. It's very common practice to buy your sushi chef a beer or a little sake to have with them. Most sushi chefs appreciate that.
Let's talk about what you're up to now. You're writing. You're on Substack.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Obviously, I've had some adventures in sushi. Gosh, it's been just over 20 years since I graduated from sushi school, and a lot has transpired. Now that I'm no longer working actively in a sushi bar, I've been spending a lot of time reflecting about the lessons that I've learned, and not just the practical things, but, just life lessons about belonging and resilience and just thinking fondly on interesting experiences that I've had. I'm doing a lot of writing about that.
And about various foods as well.
Yes, I'm still very passionate about teaching people how to look at not just sushi, but also other things in Japanese cuisine and kind of demystifying it for the home cook. Because I think a lot of times there's not a lot of middle ground. People tell me, oh, I really wanted to learn how to make this thing from Japanese cuisine, but I picked up the book and it talked about all this stuff I had to buy and all these things I'd never heard of and I couldn't find them. And I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to make a Japanese style rice ball, you really just need rice and the things to go in it. Like you don't have to have all of that stuff. And a lot of people feel like it's too complex. And so I'm spending time kind of breaking down some of these other Japanese cuisines too, items in Japanese cuisine for the home cook, because I really feel like it could be something that people enjoy.
Well, I saw today you wrote about miso soup.
Yes. When you go to a sushi bar, it's a beloved favorite. You get the miso soup, the nice warm salty broth, and it's got like the little green spinachy looking stuff in it that's actually seaweed, and it's got some tofu in it. That's great. And it's very basic and it's delicious and wonderful. But, in Japan, people make miso soup with all kinds of things in it, like potatoes. I can almost guarantee that most people in America have never had miso soup with a potato in it because it just never dawns on them because they go to the sushi bar and it's got seaweed and tofu in it. And they think that that's the only way it can be made.
What else? Tell me some more. What other dishes have you talked about?
Yeah, so we've talked about the rice balls called onigiri, which is not to be confused with the sushi because it's got the O in front of it. These are like the little triangular ones that you see all over the place, especially on Instagram that everybody makes. We've talked about okonomiyaki.
Which is?
Okonomiyaki is like a Japanese savory pancake that's it's got like a base of cabbage and onions. Okonomiyaki actually means any way you like it. So it's topped with like sauces and other things, and just teaching people how to think about like how to make it their own versus, okay, this is what the recipe says. And even though I'm not sure I like this thing, I'm going to make it anyway. We don't do that with any other cuisine. And I really want people to think differently about that.
How do people find your Substack? What's it called? Where do you go? How do you read it?
Yeah, so my Substack is called Dear Sensei, and it's dearsensei.substack.com. Or if you go on to Substack, if you're already on Substack, you can just search for Dear Sensei and it'll pop up.
How often do you publish?
I publish weekly on Tuesdays, and then there's a bonus deep dive issue where we go into like one of these topics on Japanese cuisine every third Sunday of the month.
Terrific. Marisa, it is always a real treat to talk with you.
Oh, so good to talk to you too.
So great to have you here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Marisa Baggett on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page, and I'll see you next time.